Cold call. Yeah, I know. For a lot of us, that phrase just brings back this feeling of dread, right? But what if I told you it's one of the most powerful and equitable teaching techniques out there when it's done right? So today, we're going to break down the art and science of the cold call and really transform it from a tool of anxiety into a strategy for universal engagement. And let's start by asking a really fundamental question about the way classrooms usually work.
Okay, so first I want you to just think about this for a second. In a standard lesson, when a teacher asks a question, who's actually doing the heavy lifting in their brain? Who's digging for information, putting an answer together, and getting ready to speak?
Well, the truth is, it's almost always the same handful of students, isn't it? The ones with their hands shooting up. The rest of the class can pretty much just opt out. I mean, a student can literally go through an entire class period without ever really having to think deeply, and nobody would ever notice. In that model, thinking is totally optional for most of the class.
And this, right here, is the huge shift we're talking about. With the old hand-raising model, we only really care about the output, the final answer from the person who volunteered. But with a well-done cold call, the focus flips over to the process. Every single student has to go through that mental process because they know they might get called on. Suddenly, thinking isn't optional. It's mandatory for everyone.
So, where does this all start? Well, a lot of it comes down to the language we use. Phrases like, "who knows?" or "can anyone tell me?" It sounds innocent, but it puts all the responsibility on the students to volunteer. This creates what researchers call a participation gulf, where a few confident kids do all the talking and everyone else is just let off the hook.
So what's the fix?
Well, we have to redefine the social contract in the classroom. It's all about moving away from a system where participating is voluntary and creating a new norm of universal engagement, where every single student is an expected and valued participant in the conversation.
Okay, so that brings us right to the core definition here. At its simplest, cold call is just calling on a student whether their hand is up or not. But here is the absolute key, and you got to get this. It is not a punitive gotcha move to catch someone who's not paying attention. It's an inclusion technique. It's designed to bring every voice, every thought into the room. This is the message we're sending when we do this right. It's a powerful message of value and of high expectations. It's saying, I want to hear what you're thinking, because what you're thinking is important to our class.
Okay, so for this to actually work, you can't just wing it. The mechanics have to be super precise. The power isn't just in the act of calling on someone, it's in the sequence. And it all comes down to a simple little acronym, QPN. Question, pause, name.
And I gotta tell you, the most important part of that whole thing, it's the pause. A totally silent, totally non-negotiable 3 to 5 seconds. This short little window of silence, this is where all the magic really happens. It's the time when every single brain in that room is forced to start digging, to start searching for an answer.
All right, so let's walk through the whole sequence, step by step. First, you ask your question to the whole class. Then comes that critical first pause, what we call wait time 1. Only after that silence do you say a student's name, and you say it warmly. Then you get their response, and then, you guessed it, another 3 to 5 second pause, wait time 2, before you do anything else. Trust me, this exact order, it's everything. You can't mix it up.
So let's dig into those pauses a little more. Wait time 1, that pause before you say a name, is what makes the whole thing a universal brain workout. Think about it. If you say the name first, what happens? Boom. Everyone else just checks out. They stop thinking. But by pausing first, you make sure every single student does that cognitive work.
Now, wait time 2, that pause after the student answers, is just as crucial. Seriously, it gives all the other students a moment to actually process what their classmates said, to hold it up against the answer they came up with. And it also forces the teacher, yeah, you, to not immediately jump in with great job or not quite. It signals that this answer is for the whole class to think about, not just for you.
Okay, so you've got that first answer. Great, but that's just the start. The real deep learning? That happens in what you do next. A great cold call is just the doorway to a much richer conversation, and you build that with strategic follow-ups.
So, what if a student's struggling with a really tough question? You don't just bail on them and move on. No way. You use a technique called unbundle. You basically break that big, scary question down into a series of smaller, more manageable questions. You guide them step by step until they've built the full answer themselves. It's such a brilliant way to support a student publicly without ever making them feel small.
Then there's the follow-on. This is your go-to move for weaving individual thoughts into a rich group conversation. You ask another student to add on to the first answer, or maybe challenge it, or compare it to what they were thinking. This is how you get from just recalling facts to, actual critical thinking as a whole class.
And look, it can be as simple as this. You give a quick acknowledgement to the first student, and then you immediately pivot to another to connect the dots. You're building this dynamic discussion where it's not just about getting the right answer, but about connecting ideas and valuing different perspectives.
But let's be real for a second. None of this works if your students are absolutely terrified. The number one concern about cold call is anxiety. So we have to talk about building a culture where this technique feels supportive and inclusive, not like an ambush. And if you need a reason why this is so important, get this. Research consistently shows that in typical hand-raising classrooms, male students tend to dominate the conversation. But in classrooms that use cold call as the norm, that gender gap in who talks, it just vanishes. Gone. It's a massive tool for equity.
So how do you make it warm? Well, it comes through in a few ways. It's your tone of voice. It has to be invitational. It's how you frame it, as an invitation to the conversation. You've got to straight up tell your students why you're doing this, because their voices matter. And using scripts like, "Sophia, can you get us started, please?" sends a clear signal that it's okay if the first answer isn't perfect.
And of course, it is absolutely critical to differentiate. For students who just need a little more time to think, let them jot down their answer first. For that student with really high anxiety, you can offer a gentle out like, "I can come back to you," and then you actually have to remember to come back. And for students with formal accommodations, you find other ways for them to engage. Remember, the goal here is universal engagement, not just rigid, scary compliance. Okay, so even when you have the best intentions, it is so easy to mess this up and undermine the whole thing. So let's break down the most common pitfalls that can turn this amazing tool of inclusion into a tool of fear.
All right, number one mistake, the big one, is the gotcha. Using cold call as a weapon to catch a kid who's daydreaming. The second you do that, boom, psychological safety is gone. The other big ones are rushing those pauses, which just kills the thinking time, and the teacher immediately jumping in with their own commentary, which cuts off that peer-to-peer processing.
Look, mastering this isn't going to happen overnight. It's not a one-and-done thing. It's a cycle, right? You try it, you see how it goes, you tweak it, you adapt, and you keep practicing until it just becomes a natural, positive part of how your classroom works. So, I'm going to leave you with this question to chew on. If you could build a classroom where every single student was an active participant, where thinking wasn't optional, but was truly expected from everyone, just imagine what you and your students could achieve together.